When we have a cold, we feel the physical symptoms and know we have to do something about it to feel better. Maybe that's rest, medicine, or a trip to the doctors. We try to treat the cold as quickly as possible so that it doesn't get worse. In terms of mental well-being, we tend to push things off and wait until the problems spill into other parts of our lives and become too much. It's important we treat our mental health like our physical health and get help early. What are some signs and symptoms that we should check into our mental health?
I think the biggest thing is understanding the connection between physical health and mental health. A lot of people don't realize that our mental health can manifest itself in our physical health. So a lot of times we might feel off, but we just don't quite make that connection to the mental side of things. So there's a couple different ways that can happen. A lot of times it can just be bodily sensations. Right? I can speak for myself. When I'm stressed or I'm tense, I feel it a lot in like my throat and my chest. That's where I feel it. And some people that I work with feel it at the top of their heads. Some people feel it in their posture. And so you can actually feel your body reacting to stress. And you just have to pay attention to it. And so that's just a big thing to stay in the moment and be able to check in with yourself. And that can give you a little hint is that something might be going a little wrong here. All right. And so also you can look at your relationship with the environment around you. And there's a couple different ways that we might unknowingly cope with stress and might just manifest itself in ways in our lives. There's a couple different ways to look at that. One is like externalizing behavior. So that's something where it's a little more obvious, but we might not see it connected to some stress in another part of our lives. So that can be, anger outbursts, externalizing behavior, road rage, those things where you just sort of have a short fuse and you start, fly off the handle a little bit, maybe more than you would because things are going on underneath the surface. The other is internalizing behavior, which is a little more hidden. So that could be maybe drinking a little bit more than you usually do. Pornography use is one of those where it's a little more isolated, or that can be like a coping mechanism. Like an unhealthy amount of exercise where you gotta, do more than you usually would to try to cope with a lot of that stress. And a lot of times that depression and anxiety goes unnoticed because it's so out there, or that externalizing behavior can be so bombastic at times that it doesn't look like depression. And so just keeping an eye on those type of things as they come up in your life can be like, hey, that's a little different than I usually am. And another thing that I just like to throw in there is fun things aren't fun anymore. All right. So usually some guys might go play around a golf, play 9 holes after work, or watch their favorite TV show. And all of a sudden it doesn't make you feel as good as it used to. And you don't really quite know why. And that's another thing to sort of keep an eye out for.
Like going to the doctor for our annual physical and getting our physical self checked out, it's now common for our doctors to ask about our well-being. What are some ways we can bring up this conversation with our doctors and talk about how we are feeling?
It's really important to understand that you don't have to have all the answers when you go and ask for help. All right, so when you're working with stress and emotions and anxiety, depression, a lot of that can be in a gray area. We try to put things in black and white because that makes things easier. And as men, we feel a lot of pressure to fix things. Right? We have to go and we have to have a solution. We have to have a roadmap. And it's important to understand that when you go and ask for help on this type of stuff, you don't have to have all the answers. All you can do is say, I'm feeling off. I'm just not feeling quite right. And a professional's job is to dig a little deeper and work with you and try to figure out what that means. And so that takes vulnerability. It's a lot easier said than done, but I think it's really important to understand that it's just not a necessity to have a full understanding of what's wrong with you before you go and see someone. I think I use like the medical metaphor again, like if I have chest pain, I'm going to go to a cardiologist, I'm going to go to the ER, but I'm probably not going to know what's going on with like the ventricles in my heart. I'm not a cardiologist, but I'm still going to go see a doctor. I don't have to go in with all that knowledge to have someone check me out. And the same thing goes for emotions and depression, anxiety, all that type of stuff.
From the perspective of a man and counselor, why don't men seek help when they are having difficulties with their mental health? How do we normalize this conversation, and what are simple steps we can take to reduce the stigma around it?
I think a lot of men have been conditioned to see seeking help as an inadequacy or a weakness. And so by seeking help for these things, they see themselves abandoning what they're told is important, which is rugged individualism. right? Which is the preferred method of dealing with this stuff. It's like, hey, suck it up, be a man, just push through it, deal with it, all these things that we're told over and over again. All right, and the way that I look at it is, I think brushing it off and avoiding it is the easy way. All right, and I think if I ask, people that I work with or other men, like if you think about being vulnerable and sharing all these things about yourself and seeking for help, when you think about that, does that sound easy? A lot of times the answer is no. So I try to flip that paradigm and say sharing this stuff and being vulnerable and talking about feelings is actually like the hard thing to do. That takes strength. And so you can try to flip that on its head and be like, hey, this is what being a man is, because it takes bravery and it takes strength to go and be vulnerable and talk to somebody about these things that we have to work on. And so you can take that and use that language to paint it as the strong thing to do versus what might be thought of strong in the past is actually sometimes the easy way out. Is just to not worry about it and push it off to the side. And so using that type of language, but also having empathy for them in that moment where it takes that vulnerability, can really deepen that conversation and lead men to seeing this as like a step in order to help themselves and take ownership of that.
We've learned that women and loved ones also visit mantherapy.org for resources for the men in our lives. As loved ones, what can we do to start the conversation with our men and use man therapy to help?
Sure, to start the conversation without expecting a plan or solutions. Sort of what I was saying before, when men go in and ask for help, is a lot of men will come to other people in their lives and talk about their plan, all right, talk about how they want to fix things. And so it's important to stay in the moment and talk about the feelings as they're coming out and during that conversation. Because there's an old adage that depression is directed towards the past and anxiety is directed towards the future. So if we're coming in and talking about these things that are bothering us, but we're trying to project out and talk about the finish line, that can be sometimes can be anxiety talking rather than actually sitting with the emotions. And so using these conversations between loved ones and people we care about to stay in that moment and focus on the emotions as they're coming out can normalize that conversation and allow for more connection into what's going on really in the moment. And allowing for that to be normalized is going to help increase that emotional literacy that's needed to take those next steps. And the number one thing that helps with this is social support. And the people around you and close to you are always going to be that first step in taking these subsequent steps towards growth. And so making sure that conversation is supportive and empathetic and in the moment can really help get the ball rolling on this growth that men want to partake in.